Hello and welcome to Riverside Reflections. This is our first episode of our second season, and I welcome our whole audience to a really special program today. My name is Denise Mananis. I am the Associate Vice President for External Affairs and your host. And today we have with us Paula Masterson, who I understand to be the longest serving employee at St. John's. So Paula, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So the first big question is, how long have you been an employee at St. John's?
65 years.
I can't even understand that. It's very hard to wrap my head around that.
Sometimes I can't either.
I bet that's true. So let's go back a little bit. That was actually not your first, when you started working here, not your first exposure to St. John's, because you went to
Cochrane School of Nursing.
Oh my! So you really are a dyed in the wool St. John's,
Right here.
all the way through. So I'm very interested to learn about how you went to school, what it was like then. But before we do that, where are you from? Are you from Yonkers?
Yes.
So
born and bred and gonna go feet first out.
Wow!
Right here.
All right, we love that. All of the people from Yonkers are going, yeah, that's great. Okay, so you came to, how old were you? Were you out of high school, you went to Cochrane?
Yes. The rule was that you couldn't enter Cochrane until you were between 17 and 35.
Okay.
There was an age
Range, yeah.
range. I turned 17 in April and walked through the doors here, not here, in the old building at 17.
Wow. And
There-
that's when you started school?
Right.
Okay. And in those days, so now Cochrane is a 2-year program, but in those days, what was Cochrane like?
It was 3 years,
Okay.
no summers off. And we lived, we dormed in the old building.
That was all located a little south of us, a little
Yes.
where we are now in Yonkers?
There's a nursing home there now.
Okay.
And we lived there. Occasionally we went home on weekends.
Interesting. So
but
3
we
straight years, no summers off.
No, I mean, we would get some time off, but we worked as well as went to school.
So tell me about that. What was that? And what was involved in that?
Well, we would go to class, and then some of us worked evenings, some of us would do some nights, not very many nights, mostly evenings, and come back at 8 in the morning for class.
Wow.
And it was intense.
So when you were finishing high school and you chose Cochrane, did you know you wanted to be a nurse?
I thought about that when you asked me to come here, and I thought at first, because I always referred back to the book Arrowsmith, and we had a relative in the family who was a physician, and I loved going. If we had to go to the doctor, I would sit in his chair behind the desk. He would let me thumb through his medical books, and I loved it. But I think what really sat in my head for so long was my grandmother had a stroke at 53.
Oh.
And the family, we took turns having her 3 months, 4 months at a time.
Mm-hmm.
We had no bedroom for her. She was on a cot in the dining room.
I guess
And I
that's how
can
families
still
go.
feel the cane around my neck when she wanted me to come closer. But, yeah. And I think that even my mother and the rest of my family, we're all workers. She really probably influenced me. She was with one arm and one leg. She did all the dusting.
Wow.
And she'd wash the dishes at night. And I think that plays a role in forming your drive.
Yeah.
But she was quite a lady.
Well, that's very interesting. And did your family have a reaction to your choice of going into nursing school?
Oh, my mother. She told me, it's a dirty job. And I thought, oh, God, you're not going to have the time off on the holidays. And you have to know that you have to, really want this. Fast forward, when I graduated, I really always wanted to be a nurse.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. So I don't know where that came from, because she worked in a bank, and that's where I thought I was going to be.
Interesting. So you're in school then, and tell me what life was like, not the class and the working, but sort of the social life and the social aspects of being in school, because it was very different then than it is today. And I mean, even the way the students dress. It's just, so tell me a little bit about that.
First time we went to work, we wore dark skirts and a white blouse and a butcher apron, because the uniforms hadn't come in.
Wow.
And it was a dormitory-like. It was several floors. Some had a roommate. I was very lucky. I didn't have a roommate. And I had a corner room, which was great. It had, a lot of windows there. Oh God, it was terrific. We had mandatory study from 5:30 to I think around 7 or 7:30 at night. And if you were on the honor roll, you were exempt from that.
Oh.
There were some of us that were exempt, but that was the only time everything was quiet and you could study. So we did. And I had a classmate who's deceased now, but if it weren't for her, I'll guarantee you there were probably 4 or 5 girls that would never have graduated. She held classes and reviewed everything before tests. It was really a family.
Oh, that's fascinating.
That's not to say that it wasn't fun. There were a lot of things that went on.
Oh, dear.
I was a good girl. They would go to someplace on Ashburton Avenue sometimes, and they would try to get back by curfew.
Like all college students.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, somebody would have to be inside to open the window. There was a house mother.
So when did you graduate from Cochrane?
1960.
Okay, and you came right to St. John's.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and that was in the old building yet?
Yes.
Okay, because this building didn't open until
63.
April 4th of 1963.
I don't remember the date, but
I know
it was
the date because I have the paper.
Yeah, I knew I had my second baby here.
Okay.
But it was 1960.
All right. So you graduated, you start to work, so you're now an official nurse. Where were you working in the hospital?
The OR.
In the OR.
You know why?
Why?
I was getting married, and that was a day job.
Oh. Oh, because they obviously didn't schedule things in the evening.
You had call, once in a while. But I went to the OR with 3 other classmates. One of them who I'm still very close to.
Nice.
And I didn't leave there until after my first child was born.
So you were in the OR for a few years. How many children do you have in total?
I have 3 and 4 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren.
Well, now, I will say that I remember your husband. He did also work here.
Yes.
You were in the OR. Where did you go after the OR? And
then I came back to med-surg in the evenings, 6 to 12, 1 or 2 nights a week, whatever. He would come home from work and I would
go to work.
Come in. Then I also filled in by doing recruitment for the School of Nursing.
Wow.
And just not recruitment for students, but young people. And we had a whole slide program and told them what nursing was about and everything.
great.
I loved that, you know. And then after that, I did more evenings, but I floated all over.
So let's talk about nursing at that time, which I think is different than it is today.
Very.
Yeah. So tell me about that because, you know, we, in my experience here, I've seen, even in the 30 something years I've been here, I've seen the change in how the nurses work and what they do and how they do things. So tell me what nursing was like then.
Absolutely, you were just taking care, I don't like to say it, but taking care of a body in the bed and ministering to whatever you were told they needed. You know, if they had surgery, you did dressings and you had to wash your own medicine cups out, and
Wow.
it was very different. You did all your own vital signs, all your own breathing machine treatments, everything.
Wow.
But it was caregiving compared to what it's evolved into today.
Right.
Now it's like you have to be an engineer.
Yeah.
When you and just take a walk through and see all of the things, for example, in ICU, ventilators and pumps, and we didn't know. We had to count the drops in the IVs.
Wow.
You know, there you are with the watch
watcher.
and the drops and making sure you had the right number of drops.
There's something about the old time nurse, though, that I am attracted to because I watched a lot of, I was sort of at the cusp of the end of the old era. And Florence Rondinone, who was the director of nursing here, had been here a very long time.
She was our pediatrics instructor. She was
In
a
the school.
pediatrics nurse. Yeah.
Yeah, but she was the director of nursing
Yeah.
here, and she ruled
Oh,
the roost. So that culture of nursing, can you talk about St. John's from that point of view? Like what it was like for the nurses here? Because doing the kind of work you were doing is extremely vocational. You're
Yeah.
dealing with someone that physical all the time. Then you really, you know, you have to be willing and you have to love people to do that.
absolutely. Yeah, I think you have to be an innate caregiver, but you also have to be very flexible and you have to have curiosity. I think that's why I've been so at home doing the different things that I've done, because you want to learn more, you want to do more.
Right.
And when we started to transition into the more
Technical.
advanced and technical
Environment that
aspects
Yeah.
of nursing, and then you had to evolve. I remember one evening I was working and I had to tube feed a patient, and they were going home. And I had a wife and the child, not a child,
An
an
adult child, yeah.
another adult. And I taught them how to do the tube feedings. I was on the evening shift and I said, well, you're going to go home. You got to do this. But there is a skill to doing it.
Yeah.
And I remember I got reprimanded for allowing them to try to do it. But how were they going to? And that was the beginning for me of involving the family in care and thinking about what happens when they go home. Do they just get dumped, you know? And that's what nursing is also evolved into doing. And now we have visiting nurses. We had them then,
And
but
community nurses and
yes,
yeah.
and I think that's one of the biggest changes, is that you think of the whole picture now.
Right.
You have to, because where were they going to go?
How are they going to
Right.
deal with their
You're right.
situation.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. So, did you transition from a bedside nurse at some point to, and in that sort of floating in per diem kind of feel that you were?
Well, I had experience in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
Not just med surge, but I did go to PACU for
Post anesthesia?
maybe a week.
Yeah.
I didn't really care for that.
Okay.
But I loved the OR because at that point it was technical in what you did. And
it's fascinating.
Oh, it is.
If
yeah.
you can stomach it.
Right. And then there was my classmate was in charge of like early quality here.
Oh.
Nurse that did monitoring of infections and the microbiology stuff and all of that.
Right.
And she asked me if I would be able to cover for her while she was out on a sick leave. So I said, well, I'll try it. So I did do that 3 days a week and continued in the ER.
You went to the ER.
Oh, yeah. That was my other love.
You worked with Dr. Flokus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I loved the ER. The constant change and challenge, and I guess that's in my personality somewhere, or whatever. And so I started out there.
Yeah.
Probably around 1989 or 90.
Okay.
And then it evolved into what we now know as infection control, but that was in the infancy.
Right.
And
so for our audience, can you just give me a little, like, what is infection control? What are they looking at in that?
In those
field?
days, I reviewed all of the microbiology reports, and it covered patients that either had communicable diseases or infections, or care for making sure that they were on the right antibiotics or whatever. It was more of a service from my end, to communicate and put it out there.
Right.
No influence on how to do things until the hospital was very supportive. I went to every national convention every year, either local or national.
For infection control.
Absolutely,
issues.
because everybody was learning about it.
Right.
HIV and AIDS had started in
yeah.
the 80s, and nobody really had a good understanding, and there were things changing. You had to use protective equipment, and we had to follow OSHA rules. So
Right.
then the physician I worked with, we held classes,
Right.
not just for staff here, because you had to prove to the state that you did that, but also for the physician's office staff. Some evenings we would hold those classes, and it was a big challenge, but I loved it because I felt we're all in this boat together,
Yeah. Well, there's something about that idea of we're all in this boat together that is kind of, in my experience, a hallmark of St. John's, that sense of community, that sense of belonging together, we're in it together. Can you talk about that sort of through your experience all these years, what
I
that
always
has been?
used to say that this was like a family. 1/3 of my life was my family, 1/3 of my life was here, and the other third of my life was either sleeping or eating or whatever. But I always felt, and I think in those days we all did feel that way.
Yeah.
Now it's broadened to really, the word community is so well used that the hospital has, now when you see that we're out in the community more,
Yeah.
And I think that's important, you know. I still feel that way.
Yeah. Well, I think healthcare kind of brings that out in people because it is a tough field. It is hard for people who are providers of care. They need to be able to trust and rely on their colleagues to help get the job done. And I think, as you said before, it is harder now because it is a little more technical. I mean, I think it's always been hard, but I think the technical aspects of it have changed.
Right.
And so, but it is still a vocation, and the people who come
You
have
have
great
to
heart.
want to do it.
Yeah, you have to
You
want to do
really,
it.
like I said, you have to be a caregiver, but it's not the same kind of caregiver then. You still have to be empathetic and almost walk in my shoes and think about, like, when you go home or, you know.
There's a story I heard when this building opened was in 1963, as we said. But I heard there, as you were a fairly young nurse still at the time, a staff nurse. But I heard you helped rescue somebody in one
Oh
of
my
as
God.
the building was being built. Can you tell me that story?
We had an ambulance when we were in the old building. We had our own ambulance, and we had a fellow by the name of George who drove the ambulance.
Oh, Lord.
And we would, as senior students, go through different areas, much like a rotation. Well, I was in the ER, and George got a call that we had to come to the new site. And so we drove up, white cap and uniform.
I love that.
Everything. And they, I guess I can't say his name, but he was a construction worker. And what went through my mind was, I know this man, he owns the liquor store near my house.
Oh, my.
I wonder if he was boozing it before he came to work, but he fell in the trench.
Oh,
so
no.
he needed his head bandaged. So George said to me, you got to go down there. So down into the trench I went,
In your
bandages
white
on
uniform.
his head. Yeah, so I like to say I was here at the foundation.
And I think so.
It was an interesting day.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that was.
Are there other days here? I mean, I think everyone who works in a hospital probably has days that sort of stand out in their head for various reasons. Are there some other stories or days that were particularly interesting or meaningful in the course of your time with St. John's?
We had a lot of things. My own, like my own. While I was a student, I had my first crash and burn patient
Oh,
post-op. And in those days, we didn't have oxygen on the wall. We had to go run and get the big tank.
oh Lord.
Yeah. Oh, those are really the old days.
Yeah.
But anyway, he didn't make it. And the instructors said, you will learn from this. I had to go to the autopsy to see what caused his death,
Right.
which I did learn about. And right after that, I had to go to lunch. And my classmates and I, when we used to get together, even as older like 15 years ago, we still laugh about, they included his head and neck. And I remember the physician who was here doing the autopsy. He was in his neck and out his mouth and everything. And what did they serve for lunch that day?
Tongue.
Tongue with raisin sauce. I couldn't eat. I couldn't eat.
Wow.
And in those days, they weighed us every week. They make sure that you're healthy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was always reprimanded for being too thin. Can you believe that? Really?
That's crazy.
I know.
It's such a different world.
Oh, yeah. So,
What was it like here, for example, on a day like September 11th?
oh, God. I stood right here at this window on this floor. And I had an infection control meeting that day that I was supposed to run. And I canceled it. I mean, everybody was so distraught. And I had a physician say to me, "Why are you canceling the meeting?" I said, "Because nobody's mind will be on
Infection.
what's going on. Oh, they want to know how many people had urinary tract infections? No. They were all at the windows. And then people were,
Yeah.
frantic, thinking about, I remember seeing some people getting in cars. They were going to go down and volunteer.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's a good thing that we didn't need them to go down there breathing in all of that dust and everything. But that was a frantic day here, Even the one before that, and I don't,
It was
in
the
Oklahoma.
93. Oh, the Oklahoma bombing.
The Oklahoma, I remember being on 5 West, and we were all around a TV watching this building blow up, and I thought, my God, what do they do? All my mind kept thinking about was,
What would we do?
right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to be in a place that is part of the initial responders to issues. COVID was interesting here too.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was mandated to work from home because I was over 65.
Wow.
And I was hooked up here so I could do the job I'm doing now, but doing all of the computer work from home. And I think the thing that really got to me sitting at home alone was the sirens every day. Constant.
Yeah.
And then when I would come in, either to try to pick up paperwork, but the girls even here would deliver the papers to me at home to do the work. Seeing the TV, seeing the people, imagining what they were going through here with the ventilators, all of that protective equipment. You can't breathe in that stuff, and it was so warm, and how the hospital responded, it amazed me. Set up beds in PACU, converted ASU to care center, or things like that,
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
The response to really anything, I believe the hospital has always been ready, willing, and able.
Yeah.
On whatever level, whether it's a little thing or it's a big thing, For example, in the ER, when I was working, either evenings or then days, you would get a call, "Oh, there was a school bus accident, this is an alert," and whatever. There was a system and a pattern to follow and respond to it. Make sure you can imagine. We never had 500 people come, but you think about what would you do if there was one of those shootings or something like that.
So we're prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then under where the ER was on the first floor, and under that overhang where the entrance is, having all that emergency equipment behind the fence. I mean, we do what we have to do.
I love that. What was it like coming back after COVID? How'd you feel?
It was okay. We had to wear masks if we went anywhere in the building, and especially if I don't have patient contact, so I more or less am in that little office now, But whenever there's an issue, I mean, people, they just, they're there and they're still doing.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, and I would say that the girls that run that department now, infection control, they're on top of everything. They are so focused on improving the quality of what we do and the quality of care and reducing infections, and their minds have to go in 10 different directions, and then you have to be ready for that phone call or for the Department of Health alert on Friday afternoon at 4.
Yeah.
I know those.
Yeah.
You know, but I would say that we are very compliant with everything that we do.
Yeah.
And you have to have good leadership for that.
That is true.
And you have to have the support for it, you know? And I see that.
Why do you love St. John's?
Like I said, it's 1/3 of my life. And that's a long time. If you track it out in years.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love the people. I asked Olivia before if she remembered an employee. Her name is Eula Lee. And she worked evenings when I worked evenings in the 70s. She was one of the aides on my floor. I get one of the first Christmas cards every year, still.
Yeah, there's a magic here, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the community is strong.
It is. And that's what's our little motto,
Yes,
community strong.
We are community strong.
And those are the reasons. And, you know, we used to have physicians come and teach us in the school.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would come and give lectures about whatever their specialty was.
Interesting.
You know, old Dr. Von Saal with the bones and the babies and the body casts and things like that. You can't learn that whole thing on a videotape. You learn about it, but when you have to do it, you know, when you have the connection, you know.
Yeah.
And I feel, like I said, my home.
Yeah.
And I love the people that I work with.
Well, I think you do, because 65 years as an employee is really quite something, and going strong.
Well, maybe strong, but not so fast. Slow now.
Well, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. Paula, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us
Oh,
today.
you're welcome.
We really appreciate it. I mean, you have a window into so much of what makes St. John's a special and unique place.
And what makes it, Denise, even more special in my mind is that we still have our nursing school.
Yeah.
I am very firmly in favor of keeping that.
Yeah. Oh,
we
absolutely.
produce good nurses.
Yes, we do.
A lot of our instructors are Cochrane graduates.
Yeah.
So
they're passing
we
the
have,
tradition,
yes,
the tradition of excellence down, because they
with
really
the same
amazing.
the same goals and the same attitudes, you know.
That created great nurses.
Yes.
Like you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this very special edition of Riverside Reflections.